Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today's lecture is not about romance. It is not about rediscovering love, nor is it an invitation to believe in the comforting myth of a second chance at happiness. Instead, what we are about to examine is something far more precise, far more structural, and frankly, far more unforgiving. This is part 4 of our series on remarriage for men in their 40s. And let me be clear from the outset, remarriage is not a continuation of love. It is a reconstruction of life. Most people approach remarriage with the language of emotion. They say, "This is my second love." But that framing is fundamentally flawed. The first marriage, in most cases, begins with emotion, attraction, passion, hope. It is driven by what we might call psychological momentum. But remarriage operates under a completely different system. Remarriage is not emotional. It is structural. It is the intersection of 5 powerful forces: assets, children, former spouses, residual emotions, retirement planning. These are not abstract ideas. They are active variables. And when they converge, they create not a relationship, but a system. So from a philosophical standpoint, remarriage is not a question of connection. It is a question of boundaries. And this is where most men in their 40s make a critical error. They feel love reemerging, and they assume that feeling is sufficient. They say things like, "We trust each other. We don't have problems. We can figure out the financial stuff later." But in remarriage, that mindset is not romantic, it is dangerous. Because in remarriage, conflicts do not begin with emotions. They begin with competing interests. Consider this carefully. A man in his 40s likely has accumulated assets. He may have children. He has a past that is not erased simply because a new relationship begins. The same is true for his partner. So, what is remarriage, really? It is not 2 people coming together. It is 2 life systems, 2 family structures, 2 histories, 2 financial architectures, colliding and attempting to integrate. This is why remarriage must be approached as design, not desire, as some experts put it. The first marriage begins with love. Remarriage must begin with design. Now let's move deeper. Why do remarriages fail? Not because love is insufficient, but because systems are unclear. From a systems analysis perspective, failure tends to emerge when there is ambiguity in one or more of the following: property structures, boundaries with former spouses, financial responsibilities toward children, retirement expectations. In other words, remarriage is not a failure of the heart. It is a failure of architecture. Let's talk about strategy. If a man in his 40s intends to remarry, there are 5 non-negotiable structural preparations. First, legal and financial clarity. A prenuptial framework is not optional. It is foundational. You must define existing assets, real estate, savings, business holdings, ownership of future asset growth, division rules in case of separation. Without this, you are not entering a marriage, you are entering a future dispute. Second, inheritance design. If children exist, this becomes critical. Without planning, default legal frameworks will dictate distribution, often in ways neither party intends. This includes wills, insurance beneficiaries, separation of spousal versus children's inheritance. If you do not design this structure, the law will design it for you. Third, retirement alignment. This is one of the most common sources of conflict. You must explicitly align on expected retirement income, lifestyle expectations, contribution responsibilities. A mismatch here does not create immediate conflict, but it guarantees future tension. Fourth, documentation of child-related expenses. Verbal agreements fail, always. Define scope of child support, education costs, medical and ceremonial expenses. Because the moment a large, unexpected cost appears, the absence of clarity transforms logistics into emotional conflict. Fifth, monthly financial transparency. Remarriage is not sustained by love. It is stabilized by transparency. This requires monthly financial reviews, disclosure of irregular expenses, full visibility into any financial involvement with former spouses. Secrecy is not a small issue in remarriage. It is a structural threat. Now, let's examine the most underestimated variable, the former spouse. Many assume that divorce ends the relationship. It does not. It transforms it. And unless that transformation is clearly defined, it becomes a destabilizing force in the new marriage. There are 4 recurring patterns. First, frequent communication. Not inherently problematic, but without emotional boundaries, it creates insecurity. Second, ongoing financial requests. These often escalate over time and erode trust within the new relationship. Third, interference through children. This creates triangulation, a classic source of relational instability. Fourth, unresolved emotional attachment. This is the most dangerous form because it is often invisible. And beneath all of this lies something even deeper. Even after divorce, 3 emotional residues remain. Unresolved anger, the need for validation, the impulse for revenge. If these are not resolved, they do not disappear. They reappear projected onto the new partner. A simple disagreement about money becomes a reenactment of past criticism. A delayed phone call becomes a trigger for past betrayal. A casual comment becomes an emotional explosion. Not because of the present, but because of the past. There is a profound philosophical insight here. In Tibetan thought, particularly in teachings like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it is said that consciousness, when untethered, follows the forms created by its own attachments. Remarriage operates in a similar psychological space. If attachment to the past remains unresolved, the new relationship becomes a stage where old patterns are replayed. You are not building something new. You are repeating something unfinished. So what is the most important capability for a man entering remarriage in his 40s? It is not the ability to love. It is the ability to design boundaries. Because love without boundaries feels warm at first, but over time, it consumes. Let me leave you with a precise framework. Before remarriage, 5 conditions must be verified. First, the purpose of contact with a former spouse is clearly defined. Second, emotional exchange beyond necessary communication is eliminated. Third, financial obligations are fully settled and transparent. Fourth, legal documentation is complete. Fifth, the new partner fully understands and agrees to this structure. And above all, transparency must be absolute. Because in remarriage, imagination amplifies faster than reality. A single secret can destabilize the entire system. Finally, understand this. The greatest psychological risk in remarriage is comparison. The moment you compare, she is better than my ex, he is worse than my ex, you have already shifted the relationship into a competitive framework. And in that moment, the present disappears, replaced by the shadow of the past. Remarriage is not about finding a better person. It is about becoming a more disciplined architect of life. If you approach it emotionally, you repeat the past. If you approach it structurally, you have a chance to transcend it. In the next part of this lecture, we will systematically analyze how these structural variables interact across different remarriage types and how specific conflict patterns emerge within each configuration. Now, as we concluded in the previous part of this lecture, remarriage is not sustained by emotion. It is stabilized by structure and, more importantly, by transparency. But there is one variable we must now confront, perhaps the most underestimated, yet the most volatile within that structure: children. If remarriage is a system, then children are not simply members within that system. They are dynamic agents who actively reshape it. Let us begin with a critical observation. Official statistics, such as those from Statistics Korea, do not always isolate child-related conflict as a separate category in remarriage breakdowns. But in real-world counseling environments, the conclusion is unmistakable. Child-related conflict is one of the primary drivers of remarriage instability. And more importantly, it follows a highly predictable pattern. The collapse of many remarried families unfolds through 4 distinct stages. First, rising expectations about remarriage. Second, resistance from children, triggering parental guilt. Third, parental bias toward children, leading to marital conflict. Fourth, marital fracture, escalating towards separation or divorce. This is not random. It is structural. Let us examine this progression more closely. Stage 1, the illusion of a fresh start. At the beginning of remarriage, expectations rise rapidly. Couples often believe, this time we will build a stable, harmonious family. A father may think, my children will eventually accept their new mother. A new spouse may believe, if I care for the children sincerely, we will become one family. But here lies the first fracture. Children do not experience remarriage as renewal. They experience it as disruption. To a parent, remarriage is an expansion of love. To a child, it often feels like a redistribution of love. And when expectation exceeds psychological reality, disappointment becomes inevitable. Stage 2, resistance and the emergence of guilt. Children resist not necessarily out of defiance, but out of insecurity. They fear 3 fundamental losses. Will I be abandoned? Will I be loved less? Will my family disappear? For adolescents, this fear can intensify into something deeper. They may interpret remarriage as betrayal. Now observe what happens next. The parent witnessing this resistance begins to feel guilt. A father who should correct disrespect hesitates. Maybe my child is struggling because of my decision. And in that hesitation, authority weakens. Behavior escalates. The system begins to destabilize. Stage 3, parental bias and marital conflict. Guilt rarely remains neutral. It transforms into bias. The parent begins, often unconsciously, to side with the child. A new spouse asks, why don't you say anything when your child disrespects me? And the response comes, they're going through a difficult time. Please understand. But what is communicated is not empathy. It is alignment. I stand with my child, not with you. From that moment, the marital relationship is no longer a unified structure. It becomes divided. Authority fragments. Trust erodes. Stage 4, structural fracture. Eventually, the center of conflict shifts. It is no longer about the child. It is about the couple. You always take your child's side. You don't understand my position. And finally, I cannot live in a family where I am not respected. At this point, what began as a child-related issue transforms into a marital crisis, and often into divorce. Now here is the crucial insight. This entire sequence is not accidental. It is predictable, which means it is preventable. But to prevent it, we must understand something deeper about children in remarriage. Children are not passive participants. They adapt, they strategize, not out of malice, but out of survival instinct. In blended families, children often engage in what family systems theory might describe as adaptive positioning. Let me illustrate. Strategic behaviors in blended families. First, information manipulation. A child tells the father, stepmother got angry at me. Then tells the stepmother, Dad was upset with you. This creates misalignment between the couple. And in that misalignment, the child gains psychological space and often control. Second rule, selection. When household rules differ, children selectively align with the more favorable authority. Dad said it's okay. Stepmom said it's fine. This is not confusion. It is strategic adaptation to inconsistent systems. Third, emotional alliances. Children may form implicit alliances. Father's children versus mother's children. What begins as a couple's disagreement escalates into a group conflict. Now it is no longer a marriage. It is a coalition structure. Fourth, exploitation of weakness. Children are acutely perceptive. If they sense guilt, they will use it. Do you love your new family more than me? That single sentence can dismantle parental authority. Now, let us step back. What is happening here is not chaos. It is structure responding to emotional instability. And this brings us to a profound philosophical warning found in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. When individuals fail to recognize their own emotional states, they mistake the illusions created by those emotions for reality. In remarriage, this manifests clearly. The child fears losing love and perceives threat everywhere. The parent fears rejection and overcompensates with guilt. The spouse fears exclusion and reacts with defensiveness. These are not objective realities. They are emotional projections. But once believed, they shape behavior and therefore reality itself. So what is the solution? Not control, not authority alone, but alignment. In remarriage, the central principle is this: the couple must function as a unified decision-making system. Without that unity, children do not integrate. They adapt strategically. There is also a critical timing variable: the speed of authority. If a step-parent assumes disciplinary authority too quickly, resistance is immediate, because authority without attachment is perceived as intrusion. Research and clinical experience suggest that trust in step-family structures takes approximately 3 to 5 years to stabilize. Attempting to accelerate this process does not create harmony. It creates backlash. Therefore, integration must be designed, not assumed. The following conditions are essential before and during remarriage. At least 6 months of pre-integration interaction between partner and children. Clear prioritization of the marital relationship as the structural core. Gradual, staged assignment of parental authority. Preservation of personal space for each child. Regular, structured family communication. Because here is the truth. Family integration does not occur naturally. It occurs intentionally. Let us now return to where we began. Remarriage is not the union of two individuals. It is the reconstruction of a family system. And within that system, the most underestimated variable is not love, nor even finance, but midlife identity transition. Many remarriages in one's 40s are not driven purely by love. They are driven by the desire for psychological renewal, a second beginning, a restoration of self. But if that desire is not examined, it distorts judgment. You are not choosing a partner. You are choosing a solution to an internal conflict. So we must ask the final question: am I building a new relationship or repeating an unresolved one? Because if the past has not been processed, it does not remain in the past. It becomes embedded in the present. There are, as we discussed earlier, 3 emotional residues that persist after divorce. Unresolved anger, the need for validation, the impulse for revenge. If these remain active, the new partner becomes not a person, but a psychological instrument, a mirror, a substitute, a battleground. And this is why remarriage must begin not with hope, but with clarity, not with emotion, but with understanding. In the next lecture, part 5 of this series, we will go even deeper. We will examine the 5 most common conflict patterns in remarriage, why many remarriages destabilize within 5 years, the critical mistakes men must avoid, the structural differences between successful and failed remarriages. If you begin to see remarriage not as chance, but as design, then you are no longer reacting to life. You are constructing it. If today's lecture has given you a clearer framework, I invite you to continue this journey. Subscribe, like, and share so we can continue building deeper, more precise conversations about life, relationships, and the structures that shape them. I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you.